Hey everyone, if you're not aware, my name is Dave, and this is my channel, Zilog and Moto. And also, if you're not aware, the goal of Zilog and Moto is to go through each and every English language game from the Sega Master System, Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X consoles, and review each one with what's turned into about a 20-minute look at the outsides and insides of these titles. So far, we're somewhere around 7% done with that list, so I'll be at this for a long time to come. And I hope all of you are able to settle in and enjoy the ride, so to speak. For today's review, we're looking at the Master System console again, and specifically at an earlier title on the console, for reasons that will be clear when we get to the in-depth look at the package in just a minute. And that title is Spy vs. Spy. Now, the average viewer in 2020, if you're under a certain age, this will look like just another Master System action title. But if you're a little older, you're probably familiar with where Spy vs. Spy comes from and what in the world this small MAD logo means. Well, let's start there. For the uninitiated, that MAD logo refers to Mad Magazine, which is a magazine that dates back to August of 1952. MAD actually started out life as a comic book specifically for its first 23 issues from EC Comics, who are probably better well known for the Tales from the Crypt series and other titles that really pushed the envelope back then. Due to the controversy around their titles, EC ended up focusing just on MAD, and creative issues led to switching to the magazine format that we know today in 1955. Regardless of page size or formatting, MAD is an anthology publication that has always been a mix of gross humor and actually some decent quality satire of anything pop culture. For a lot of people, MAD has been historically viewed as juvenile or low quality, but I'd say a lot of those people have probably never actually read a copy, as everyone I've read has actually featured some pretty great comic writing, and I guarantee you probably a lot of your favorite stand-up comics would say the same thing. Unfortunately, in recent years, MAD has seen its success plummet, and at this point is more or less a corpse, with its owners only keeping the intellectual property around due to its massive backlog of content that can be mined to produce special collections and new issues that consist of mainly recycled material, like that one I just showed you. Which is why I led off by saying that younger viewers may not be familiar with the magazine or the Spy vs. Spy characters. Those characters, consisting of the white spy named Heckle and the black spy named Jackal, made their debut in a segment in MAD issue 60 from January of 1961. So close to, but not quite as old as Asterix that we looked at just a few episodes ago. The gist of the comics is the two spies never speak, and they're constantly setting traps for one another in their fight over classified documents and other espionage-related items that usually have humorous and possibly violent results. To give a slightly more modern example, you probably know that Itchy and Scratchy from The Simpsons is a take on Tom and Jerry, but it's probably more accurate to say that it's actually Tom and Jerry mixed with Spy vs. Spy, and those of you that are familiar with all three will know what I mean. Spy vs. Spy became a signature comic in MAD, sometimes appearing multiple times per issue. In 1984, programmer Michael Riedel and developer First Star Software decided to make a game around the characters for the Commodore 64 and the Atari 800, which is where I first played the game, and its massive success led to ports across all 8-bit consoles and computers over the next few years, which leads us to today's game. Does the Master System version live up to the Commodore original? And is the game worth playing today? Well, we'll take a look at all that and more, but first, a look at the package. And here is Spy vs. Spy, and from the front cover, it looks more or less like any other 1980s Master System release, with one notable exception, and that's the artwork. Spy vs. Spy has some great custom artwork from the guys at MAD, and this is what a Master System cover should look like. You've got the MAD logo small and tastefully tucked to the side of the Sega logo, and then below that you've got the iconic Spy vs. Spy logo direct from the magazine. And then there's some very colorful art showcasing Heckle and Jackal trying to sneakily trick each other with bombs. This is a cover that's going to get kids, or anyone, to want to buy a game and see what it's all about. Good job on Sega's part here. Also, note the inclusion into the action category at the top, which I guess is technically accurate, but it's also only a portion of the game, which we'll get to in a bit. Now, remember how I said it looks like any other Master System game from the front? Well, as soon as I turn to the side, you're going to think, hey, that looks odd, it's thin.
And that's because in the US, Spy vs. Spy was released as a Sega card title only. To make things more confusing, Asian areas also got the Sega card release exclusively, but PAL regions got both a card and cartridge release, and Brazil just got the cartridge. I can only assume that the reason why PAL regions in Brazil got the cartridge release is because of the success of the Master System 2 in those locations that didn't feature a card slot, but still kind of crazy that there's all these versions of the title floating around. The outside of the case and inner cover appears to be in good shape with an intact but bent hang tab at the top. But as you flip it over to the back, uh-oh. This is one of those things that either I didn't notice when I bought it, or I just didn't care because I was too excited to have another Master System release to my collection. Apparently, someone removed the barcode from the back cover for some crazy reason. Maybe there was some send-away offer, who knows. But to add insult to injury, they didn't just remove the barcode, oh no, they ripped the plastic open to get to the barcode, rather than simply sliding the cover out and going with a precise cut. Unfortunate to say the least, and I might eventually replace this copy because of it. Oh well. Moving on, the rest of the back cover is an interesting layout. Rather than the typical early Master System release with 2 screenshots at the top, Sega switched to having 4 screenshots on the left side, and then having the flavor text on the right rather than being centered. I actually like this layout choice a lot, and I don't understand why they didn't do it more often. The screenshots are of a decent quality for the time, and they show as good a variety as you can for the game, although I would have liked to see them a little bit larger. The flavor text does a good job of explaining the game, and emphasizes you and a friend, which is important. Also, I like how the bottom of the info box where it says Megatype, referring to which megabit series the game would belong to, it simply says Sega card, seeing as how the Sega card was limited to only a quarter megabit. Well played, Sega. When I pulled this off the shelf to play it for the review, it felt a bit heavy, especially for it being a card release. So I opened the box and figured out why. For some reason, whoever I bought this from not only had marred the back of the box, but they included not 1, not 2, but 3 of the same poster with the game along with a manual. And I could be wrong, but I don't think this poster even goes with this game. Because if you open it up and look at it, it's got every Sega card release, including Woody Pop that was cancelled in the US, but not Spy vs. Spy. Very odd. Oh, and those of you with an eagle eye know that's not an original Sega card sleeve. I did buy that on the aftermarket. It'd be nice to have an original one, but I think this is good enough for me, and it's good quality. A quick look at the manual since I'm running a bit long. The manual is a little bent up from the usual wear and tear, but it's intact. And it's a great manual. Spy vs. Spy, as you can imagine for a game that originally comes from 1984, isn't terribly complicated. But the manual does an excellent job of explaining the game and all the things that go on in it. I especially like all the screenshots they included, and the nice chart of traps and what can be done to disarm them. Okay, that's the package. Let's play the game and see just how accurate my memories of playing this game 30 plus years ago with relatives on the Commodore 64 are. Before getting too into the game, here's some more minor details about its background that I didn't have room for in the introduction. Spy vs. Spy is a definite oddity when it comes to the US Master System library, as every other Sega card release for the console came out in late 1986, around the release of the console. Spy vs. Spy didn't come out until October 1988 instead, about 2 years later than all the other Sega cards. Technically, Spy vs. Spy was originally released in late 1986 for the Master System in Japan, and then a year later in Europe, so my only guess is that since Sega had already designed the game to fit on a card for the Japanese release, they just kept that same design as a cost-saving measure and dumped it out in the US to compete with the NES version for Christmas in 1988. With both games coming out in the same month. So, if the trivia question ever comes up, what was the last Sega card game? It's this. As I mentioned earlier, Spy vs. Spy was originally released for the Commodore 64 and the Atari 8-bit computer line in October of 1984. The game proved to be wildly popular and paved the way for 2 direct sequels in 1985 and 1986, which both were also ported to a wide variety of home computer formats. For the original game, most versions of the game look very similar, and it appears that the various developers that ported the game all took care to accurately reflect the original C64 Atari release, with even the eventual Amiga and Atari ST 16-bit releases still looking like Spy vs. Spy, just with slightly cleaned up graphics. Well, except for the NES version, that is, which appears to be recreated from scratch versus merely reprogrammed. Just to get it out of the way, because I don't really want to spend a lot of time on the comparison, I definitely prefer the classic, accurate representation of the game on the Master System to what the NES got. Specifically, I don't like how zoomed in the NES version is, or how the screen layout was altered. It just feels like they changed too much about the game. As stated, the Master System definitely does resemble the original incarnation of the game, with a slight facelift, so to speak. Sega tapped then 21-year-old Yuji Naka, who you may have heard of from, just being the head of Sonic Team and having a direct hand in designing the entire Sonic the Hedgehog series on the Genesis, to work on the port. And considering the fact that he was working with a 1/4 megabit limitation of the Sega card, I think he did an admirable job. Now, granted, he was porting a game originally programmed by one person in 1984, so it's not like it was an overly complicated effort to begin with, but still, programming all aspects of a video game, graphics, sound, gameplay, engine, it's impressive, and I can see why Yuji went on to be a critical part of Sonic Team just a few years later. Spy vs. Spy is an odd game to try to classify. As I mentioned before, probably the best classification for the game is action, just due to how the game plays, but it's also got strategy and maze elements mixed in as well. The premise for the game is as follows. Heckle and Jackal are at an office complex where there are 4 items the spies need to complete their mission. A bundle of cash, a key, a passport, and some confidential documents. However, the spies can only carry one of those items at a time, for some reason. Just go with it, it's a game. So, for the spies to collect all 4 of the items together, they must also find a bag to put the items in. Once one of the spies has the bag with all 4 items, they can then escape the office building by exiting through a door to the airport, flying off and leaving the other spy in the dust. The Master System version of the game features 16 levels, and if you're playing in single-player mode, if you successfully beat Jackal to the airport, you'll always play as Heckle, the white spy in single-player. You'll proceed to the next level, but if Jackal beats you, it's game over. The office complex you're exploring starts out with a tiny 6 rooms, just enough to have a room plus 1 for each of the collectibles, and then as the levels proceed, they'll quickly start to expand, and if you can make it to the last level, you'll be looking at a massive building with 512 rooms to run through and search. Thankfully, a map of the building is included, and you can check at any time to see where you are and attempt to figure out where you need to go, as the locations of the 4 items in the bag are marked on the map. However, there's a few catches. The first one is that while the locations of the items are marked, you're not told which item is where, as they're marked with just generic black dots. With the bag being the most important item to collect, sometimes the game can turn not just based on how many items a player is able to locate, as much as who is able to find that bag first, and start actually collecting the items, versus just moving them around the map. Next, while the rooms are always laid out on an 8x8 grid, every room doesn't necessarily connect with an adjacent room. This is where the maze aspect of the game comes in, because frequently you might find yourself one room over from an item, but with no door to get to that item, so you have to maneuver around until you can find the path to it. And the doors between rooms are not spelled out on the map, so unless you create your own map, there'll be lots of mad dashing between rooms, hoping that you're going the correct way. Another thing, after the first few levels, the buildings will begin to have multiple floors, accessible by rooms that have ladders that in them go leading up or down. To add to the insanity, usually there are multiple ladder rooms to get between floors, with each ladder room leading to a different section of a floor. Meaning, for instance, that if you want to get to a certain part of the second floor, you have to take a specific ladder to get there. Finally, there's the escape, and here's where things get interesting. The game offers 2 options when it comes to the door to the airport. By default, the door is hidden until someone is carrying all 4 items in the bag. Also, the room with the airport door is randomized, so while you can map each level out if you're so inclined, successfully escaping will always be a bit of a guessing game, which gives the other spy a chance to get back in the game if they can catch the player with the bag while they're wandering around looking for the way out. If this makes things too difficult, you can also turn on the option to show the door from the beginning of the level, and I could definitely see doing this to prepare for some of the larger levels. But for the smaller ones, I think leaving it hidden is the way to go. One thing I haven't mentioned so far is the traps, which is where the strategy of the game comes in. In any room you're in, you can place one of 5 traps: a time bomb, a regular bomb, a spring, a bucket, and a gun. If the other spy triggers that trap, either by opening a door or searching a piece of furniture, they'll be killed. But you can also be killed by your own traps, so you must be careful to not place a trap and then forget about it. Traps can be disarmed, except for the time bomb, so when setting them, you have to hope the other player didn't see you place the trap. One thing I love to do, especially against the computer, is have one item, let the computer collect everything else, and sit in a room with only one door, but place a gun trap. In the easier difficulty levels, the computer will always trip the gun and shoot themselves, allowing you to grab all the items and race for the airport door. So that's the maze and strategy elements, but what about its main classification, action? Well, this is probably the weakest part of the game. When the spies are in a room with one another, they can fight, with one button for punches and one for kicks. Each spy can take 8 hits before dying, and when they die, they lose time from the game timer, and have a 15-second timeout before respawning. There's just 2 problems. In the Master System version, the characters don't have life bars, so it's hard to know just how close to death each spy is. This is something the NES version got right in the redesign. Also, the fighting seems a bit like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, with both characters just slamming buttons, and you can very easily lose if you're not careful, and later on in a level, losing just one fight might mean the difference between winning and losing a level. Playing the computer in single-player mode is fine, but I think the real strength of the game is the 2-player mode. Having 2 people compete against each other and trying to find the items while beating the clock, running around the map like rats, laying traps for one another, and possibly defusing them if one player is watching the other player's screen, and potentially getting into hand-to-hand combat to win a mission can lead to all sorts of bragging over wins and the agony of defeat to the loser. While the simplistic gameplay will get old after a while, I could definitely see going back and forth for a few hours of fun, at least. I didn't speak much about the graphics or sound, because there's not really a ton to talk about. The graphics in the game are fairly simple and repetitive, but they get the job done, and the increase in color palette from the Commodore or Atari versions is helpful. The sound is decent, and like the graphics, I'd say it's cleaner than the older versions, but there's nothing special about the sound effects, and there's only one background music track that just loops the entire game. I'd say that overall this version of the game is the best one, with the possible exception of the Atari ST port, but being that the Atari ST is a 16-bit machine, I don't know that that's even a fair comparison. Overall, Spy vs. Spy is a tough title to rate. I think if you're going to simply go by its release date in the US, it can't get more than 2 stars, as it's a pretty primitive game by October of 1988 standards. However, if you factor in that the game really should have come out in late 1986, like all of the other Sega card releases, that helps it a bit, along with the fact that it's the best version of the game available until at least 1989. I think for those reasons, plus with how fun the game can be in 2-player mode, I'm going to award Spy vs. Spy 3 stars. But definitely keep in mind that to truly get the most out of the game, you'll need to be playing it against someone else instead of the computer, and if you're the type to only play games in single-player mode, probably knock it down a star.
And that was Spy vs. Spy. I had some fun playing this, and reliving those memories of playing with family. Geez, almost 35 years ago now. Crazy stuff. Like other games, it was interesting to play this with an adult perspective, and honestly, I don't think my opinion on it changed that much. It was interesting, however, to see how different it looked from the Commodore 64 version, because in my head, this vision that they were the same, and that's certainly not the case. Also, finding out about the weirdness about how it came out as a Sega card title so much later than all the others, and that it was worked on by Yuji Naka, were interesting bits of trivia. Next week, the Genesis is up again, and I think I've got a good selection for a Halloween-ish title to go along with the upcoming holiday. Obviously, this year Halloween is probably going to be a bit different, but that doesn't mean we can't still watch some horror movies or Halloween episodes of TV shows, or play some games that feature things that go bump in the night, and eat way too much candy. Because if there's one thing I need more of, it's candy. Ugh. Remember, Whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.